Okay, picking up exactly where we left off last time. Why is Taiwan different from Ukraine? Why are we strategically and morally obliged to come to the aid of the former, but not the latter, should they fall under invasion by their larger belligerent neighbor next door? The first answer is 2 words long. Freaking communism. The second answer is slightly longer. Keeping your word to an ally. Now, the central defining feature of communism is the belief that communist governments exist to advance the cause of world communism. When communists say, workers of the world unite, they're talking about uniting under a one-world totalitarian communist state. Communism is expansionist in its very conception. There is nothing Marx or Engels ever wrote, those two dull, overrated German reprobates whom we're still talking about for some reason, that says, yeah, just take over a dozen countries or so, and that's plenty of communism. We can stop there. No, they were very clear and very emphatic on the point that communism cannot permit non-communist systems to coexist with it, because in a singular and all too rare display of self-awareness, Marx and Engels seem to have realized that in an open marketplace of political systems, their system would never come off looking all that good when compared with the alternatives. The Vietnam War may have been a tragedy. It may have been, in the operational sense, an ill-conceived, very badly run thing. But resisting the spread of communism, fighting on behalf of people who have democratic self-government and would very much like to continue having it, when the alternative was for us to sit and watch them be overrun by the Soviet-sponsored Red Hordes, that was always a worthwhile and a morally righteous cause. In China's case, it's worth noting that on every land frontier that they share with a democratic country, there is a currently ongoing border dispute in which shots have been fired. Why? Because China is an expansionist, communist power. They're going to grab whatever new territory they can, and the only way to repulse them is by force of arms. And when they inevitably try to grab the island of Taiwan, turning back the tide of communist expansion isn't the only reason why we have to stand and fight them, but it is a good one. If the ironically named People's Liberation Army overruns Taiwan while the rest of the world looks on like a bunch of simpering cowards, do you really think they're going to stop at overrunning Taiwan? Or do you think they're going to act like communists act and say, I think I'd like a bit of that Malaysia. Oh, and that Indonesia over there, that looks, let's have a bit of that New Guinea on the side. And oh my, that Australia down there, that sure does look tasty. Might have to save room for dessert. It became fashionable somewhere along the way. It became unfashionable, pardon me, to say that communism is an evil, awful, monstrous, depraved system that nobody wants to live in who has actually lived in it. The only people who think they want to live under communism are rich, spoiled, decadent, dumbass, middle-class kids and Bernie Sanders. But it needs to be said because it's true. It's been true and it remains true. You can't love freedom and tolerate communism. Some things have to be opposed because the consequences of not opposing them are too terrible to contemplate. Moreover, the Chinese nationalists, the people who were the forebears of today's Taiwanese nation, they were an ally of ours in the Second World War. When they lost the Chinese Civil War in 1949 and had to flee to Taiwan, President Harry Truman gave his personal assurance to Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek that we would fight for them if the communists tried to invade. And we have committed a lot of betrayals of Taiwan since then. Thanks for that, Jimmy Carter. But no U.S. president has ever revoked Truman's assurance to Chiang. Thus it remains in force, and it damn well should remain in force. We could not have defeated the Japanese Empire without the help of China's nationalist government. And today, their descendants, Taiwan, stands as a shining example of what the Chinese people are capable of achieving as a free people in a democratically self-governing society. Russia? Russia is not communist, first of all, and second of all, Vladimir Putin is too smart to want to attempt a reassembling of the Soviet Union. In the pieces of land that he has grabbed from Georgia and Belarus and the Ukraine in recent years, he said he did it because there were terrorist groups operating in those areas. They were attacking his people and his territory, making incursions, and the governments of those countries were either unwilling or unable to stop it. And look, I'm not here to vouch for Vladimir Putin's moral character, But he's not making that all up. There really is terrorism there. Besides, is there any good reason to think he really wants to invade and occupy the entirety of Ukraine and administer it as some sort of satellite state? Because why? It already is a Russian satellite state for all practical purposes. It's more likely that he's just doing a bit of provocation and saber-rattling in order so he can get what he really wants from the Ukrainians, which is to lease 1 or 2 naval bases in the western Black Sea. Maybe he thinks massing troops on the border, he can drive down the asking price by doing that, and maybe he's right. But invading the whole country when all you really want is a couple of ports that you can probably just as well pay money for, it doesn't make sense. It confers no strategic advantage. Russia doesn't need Ukraine as a buffer against a German land invasion anymore, because I'm pretty sure Angela Merkel won't be rolling any panzers over the River Oder anytime soon, because she's too busy teaching all the little German kids to speak Pashto and Arabic. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we have never met an interpersonal issue that couldn't be solved by single combat to the death. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. Happy Thursday. It's one of those rare Thursday programs. I am your eponymous host and humble servant, and first let me apologize for having been absent last night. Had another hockey game that sneaked up on me right at the last minute. And let me just say, I enjoy being right as much as the next guy does, but right now I'm just a little bit weirded out that the universe appears so hell-bent on immediately vindicating my predictions of future events. So you remember last Friday when I laid out the whole theory of how Hillary Clinton can potentially insinuate herself into the presidency without the annoying complication of actually having to be elected? And how the first step was going to be moving Kamala Harris out of the vice president spot, potentially by nominating her for the Supreme Court. Well, it seems the wheels are already in motion, and it's happening already. You know how old Stephen Breyer is? He is so damn old, he's a white male Supreme Court justice who was actually nominated by a Democrat president. Imagine that happening today. And when the news broke of his impending retirement a couple days ago, nobody was more surprised than he was. And I'm trying to imagine how that phone call went when Breyer called up the White House switchboard to ask what in the blue blazes was going on here. And he got connected to Chief of Staff Ron Klain. Hello, Ron. I was hoping to talk to the president, actually. Sorry, the president's indisposed at the moment. He'll be indisposed until Murder, She Wrote ends. But what can I help you with, Justice? Well, I was just wondering where this story came from about me announcing my retirement. Oh, that's right. I did hear you were stepping down due to ill health. Congratulations on your retirement, and thanks for your years of service. But that's just the thing. I'm not really in ill health. I actually feel pretty good, and I hadn't really given any thought to retiring. Oh, yes, you had. I had? Yep, and you are in extremely ill health. It's amazing you're not dead yet. But my doctor said I passed my physical with flying colors. He lied. He lied? He lied. We actually sent your case file to Dr. Fauci. He says you'll be stone dead in a moment. Well, he is America's top doctor. But isn't he a virologist? And don't I have medical privacy rights? Medical privacy rights? Yeah, that's rich. You're a funny guy talking about medical privacy rights in 2022. What a hoot! You know, Ron, I can't help getting this feeling like you guys are shoving me aside against my will because you know you're going to get shit-rocked in the midterms and you think your only chance of putting another left-wing radical on the court is if you do it in the next 10 months. Justice Breyer, I have always really enjoyed your ability to tell fanciful, tall tales. And the President and I want to thank you again for your many years of service. Please accept our sympathies for your impending death. Okay, well, I still feel pretty good, but whatever you and Dr. Fauci say, I guess. Now, I think the question of whether you nominate Kamala Harris for the open seat is a fascinating one, and it could wind up being a more consequential matter than just the replacement of one reliably left-wing justice with another. It's almost like they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. I heard Alan Dershowitz saying earlier today that he thinks the vice president isn't allowed to break ties in the Senate on matters of advice and consent, or in other words, in the confirmation of nominees. And I hesitate to quibble with a man who's been a constitutional law professor for far longer than I've been alive, but I think his interpretation is wrong in this case. Now, he's saying, in other words, and this is purely in the realm of the hypothetical because it's never happened in real life, that the tie-breaking vote that's prescribed for the vice president in the Constitution applies only to the legislative functions of the Senate and not to votes on confirming presidential nominees. But he's not taking a very originalist position here because he's reading things into the text that are neither stated nor implied from where I sit. All the Constitution says is that in the event of a deadlocked Senate, the vice president is to break the tie. It says nothing whatever about that arrangement only applying to legislative acts, but if he's right and I'm wrong and the vote finishes in a 50-50 deadlock and there is no tiebreaker, then the nomination fails. So in the abstract, I don't think there's anything preventing Kamala Harris in her capacity as president of the Senate from exercising the tie-breaking vote in a judicial nomination the same as she would for any act of legislation. But that premise does not hold when the nomination being voted on is of her. Basic ethics and fairness demand that she would recuse herself, not just from casting a potentially tie-breaking vote, but in having any presiding role in the proceedings when she is also the person being nominated. I don't think even the most maniacal Kool-Aid drinking Democrat partisan would argue for the propriety of a nominee also being the presiding officer and the tie-breaking vote in the matter of her own nomination. And maybe I'm giving him too much credit, which does happen fairly often. But even for the Democrats, I think that's probably a bridge too far. And obviously, we don't know that Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee. It does solve the immediate problem. That is to say, you need to move her out of the spot she's currently in so you can put someone at VP who is seen as a credible replacement for President Corpsey Cadaverton. But you can't just fire her because she's terrible at her job, because then Twitter will say you're a racist and you hate women. And it's fun, isn't it? Being made to sleep in an uncomfortable bed that you've made for yourself. So in order to get rid of her without causing political blowback from the social media rage mob and the fake news performance art industry, you have to have her fail upward. Just like she failed upward from concubine of a daytime talk show host to concubine of the California Assembly Speaker, and then she failed upward from that to member of the Assembly, and failed upward from that to State Attorney General for a few years, until she failed upward to Senator, then she failed upward to Vice President. And there are only two places you can fail upward from Vice President. One is President, the other is Supreme Court Justice. And then boom, just like that, there it is, like manna from the heavens. Here comes a Supreme Court vacancy, right on cue, right at the exact moment when they needed one. So this solves the problem, right? We get rid of Kamala, we swap her out for Hillary, wait half a year or so, and then throw Joe under the 25th Amendment bus. Except there's only one problem. You have to have confirmation hearings. And your nominee is Kamala Harris. The same Kamala Harris whose performance has regressed so badly these 12 months on the job that she now struggles in interviews almost as badly as Joe Biden does. Friendly interviews with softball questions from sympathetic reporters who don't want anything but to blow smoke up her ass and make her look good. If she has that much trouble in the controlled, scripted, stage-managed world of fake TV news, what is it going to look like when she has to answer legitimately difficult questions from the Republican senators on the Judiciary Committee? When Ted Cruz grills Kamala Harris on matters of judicial philosophy and constitutional law, is there any potential version of those events where Kamala Harris is going to come off looking good? Spoiler alert. No, there is not. Ted Cruz is a guy who's actually eminently qualified to sit on the Supreme Court, who spent his formative years clerking on the court for Justice Kennedy, who knows constitutional law like the back of his hand. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is someone who failed the bar exam on her first try, who has zero experience practicing law in the real world, who only really needed a law degree so that she could put it on her political resume. And when Cruz is finished with his questions, look who's waiting on deck. Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton, and batting cleanup, my favorite senator, national treasure in his own right, John Kennedy of Louisiana. We know what the questions are going to sound like from the Democrat side. Vice President Harris, tell us about your lived experience as a woman of color. Vice President Harris, would you like to tell us how important it is for women to have access to reproductive health care services? Vice President Harris, how many American ancestors do you have? How much I would love to hear this question randomly blurted out just to see how she reacted. You know, since she so enjoys turning on the fake black accent and portraying herself as a stakeholder in the historical African-American experience when she is not one. I just wonder how many repetitions of the question it would take in order for her to break down and say, okay, 0! I have 0 American ancestors. Are you happy? I think that's a task I would assign to Senator Kennedy if I was the head coach of this team. Because he's got that particular skill of using his folksy, affable, down-home charm to get the witness feeling just comfortable enough to lower their guard. And then he pounces and sinks that dagger in and gives it a nice, good twist. Yes, I do love me some John Kennedy. It still sounds slightly weird to say that, but I will get over it. But here is the real overarching question in this whole scenario. Do the Democrats actually want Kamala Harris on the Supreme Court? Or do you think they might prefer a series of events where her nomination gets defeated and they're rid of her altogether? Because from where I'm sitting, I don't think she can pass a confirmation vote in a 50-50 Senate with no tiebreaker from the chair. Can you picture Joe Manchin voting to confirm Kamala Harris after 8 or 10 days of what are likely to be train wreck confirmation hearings? Because I cannot. Same deal with Kirsten Sinema. And Manchin's already on the record as saying, you know, don't think I'm just going to be a rubber stamp for whoever gets nominated, because I'm not. So let's say you don't have those 2 Democrats, which is a reasonable thing to surmise. Now you're sitting at 52-48 against. That means you need to flip 5 Republicans in order to confirm the nomination. And I'll give you Willard Romney, because why wouldn't I? I'll give you Susan Collins. I'll give you Lisa Murkowski, because they're both reliable Democrat votes more often than not. But 2 more beyond that, I just don't see it. There are some squishy Republicans left, to be sure, don't get me wrong, whether it's Ben Sass or Bill Cassidy or whoever, but it's going to take some pretty heroic feats of squishiness to get confirmation votes out of those guys after a week or 2 weeks' worth of cringe-inducing performances from the prospective nominee. And then where does that leave him? Crying Chuck Schumer, bless his heart, says he's going to have a nominee confirmed 1 month from yesterday. So let's just take a moment to drink in the preposterousness of that statement and have a hearty laugh at Crying Chuck's expense. Crying Chuck Schumer, the lion of the Senate, the man who lives in fear of a primary challenge from a 31-year-old former cocktail waitress who doesn't know how a garbage disposal works, and whose defining character trait is the belief that everyone secretly wants to have sex with her. That's what Chuck Schumer lives in fear of, ladies and gentlemen. But here's the last question for tonight. What is the promise of affirmative action when Joe Biden says back in March of 2020, long before he even has the nomination in hand, that he guarantees to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court? What is the promise of that guarantee? I mean, beyond the fact that he's just pandering for votes from a core Democrat constituency. We were told back at the dawn of affirmative action that if we elevated certain people to certain positions, gave them certain privileges and certain opportunities on the basis of their immutable personal characteristics rather than on their qualifications, that this would improve the condition of women and minorities, and by extension it would improve the condition of the country at large. That was over 50 years ago. So where are the results? Has affirmative action done any of the things it was supposed to do? Is there any evidence that it's had a positive effect on anything? And most importantly, when you launch a social engineering experiment and you give it half a century and it produces no demonstrable results, isn't it time to talk about ending that experiment? Because isn't that what one does with experiments that fail? And that's just about all I've got for tonight. I don't know whether I'll be back with a Friday episode tomorrow. Maybe, maybe not. I'll leave you in suspense. But in any event, thank you very much indeed for watching. I will see you next time. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.